Question. Did the interurban, the rail line, did it come up into Seymour? And
It did.
Are you old enough, sister, to remember that, or was it gone before
And
you?
it went from Louisville to Indianapolis.
Yeah, 'cause my dad took it. He was a ministerial. He went to Southern Seminary, and he was a student pastor. What was Paris Crossing somewhere out there? I know Jeff Hood has been out that church out there.
Wasn't the terminal for the interurban on East Second Street?
Yes, yeah.
Before, was it Ewing? Before
Well,
Ewing?
Of course, when Meady Shields first platted out Seymour,
Yeah.
and if you recall, he wanted the East-West Railroad to run through Seymour, and it was scheduled to go through Rockford. So he made a bargain with the railroad engineer. Now, I don't mean the train engineer, I mean the engineer as in designing the railroad. He told them if he would put the railroad through Seymour, he would give them a terminal, and he did. It was a round
Yes.
terminal where they could change trains and move the engines around, and it was on 2nd Street.
Yeah.
He also told them he would build up the railroad, the area where the railroad was to go. And so if you think about the railroad coming alongside Tipton Street there, where it's built up on that hill, he used his mules to bring in, because let's face it, Seymour was pretty swampy. It was a pretty low-lying land. There was a lot of problems with water. And so he told them he would build that up so they could put the railroad on top of that. And that's what they did, and that's one of the reasons he got them to put the East-West Railroad through Seymour. During the 20s, the Pennsylvania Railroad, which I always get them mixed up as whether it's east-west or north-south, it's the east-west. It had 22 trains running through Seymour a day. And all these people complain about the trains we have today. They had 22 trains going through Seymour. And
You always got stopped by a train. It didn't make any difference what direction you were going to. We had one fire department.
right,
And if there was a train on the track, just forget it, the house
yeah,
burned
the house
down.
would burn down because there was no other fire department. And that was true. And I mean, that's not been too many years that we've had other fire departments.
No, that's right. But we have, isn't there 4 or 5 now in each quarter section?
Well, we've got one over across from Walmart, and one on Fifth and Pine, and of course the one down on Bruce Street, South Street there. So we have 3 fire departments right now, but they are on either side of the railroad track. But back then, there was one fire department, and it was downtown on the corner of Indianapolis Avenue and Chestnut. And that was the only fire department there was.
Yeah.
But the interurban was real popular. People would go to Indianapolis and Louisville on the interurban. I do not remember the interurban.
Okay.
So it was done away with, I think, before I got old enough to, but we wouldn't have afforded it anyway. It wouldn't make any difference. We couldn't afford to ride on it. There was bus service. And, you know, they talked about the 22 trains. Well, that was the North-South Railroad. The East-West, that was the B&O. And they went from Seymour to Brownstown. And so Brownstown passed a law that they had to stop in Brownstown. They were just stopping in Seymour, and they got really upset about it. So they managed to pass a law to make them stop there too. But railroads were a big, big part of our economy. And
Well, they are now.
they still are. And you know, people complain about the length of the railroad, the trains going through Seymour. And whenever the trains get longer, I feel pretty good about it. That means the economy's up. When people are shipping more by train, the economy's doing better. And that always, you know, and people complain about the semi-trucks on the road. Right now, there's tons of trucks. But to me, that indicates that our economy
It's more
is
fuel
doing better.
efficient than they
And,
take those in containers and put them on trucks.
yeah.
I mean, on trains.
Okay.
It makes a big
Yeah.
difference.
Did they, you said they had the terminal here for the train, and we're just new in town, and I noticed the grain elevators, the old grain elevators out here. Was it, at one time, was Seymour a hub for distribution of grains, corn,
Definitely.
wheat?
The Bleach Mill, they took in, I don't know how many thousands of bushels of wheat that they would process in a day. They used to have a big sign up that told how many bushels that they would process every day. And farmers from all around would bring in their grain and sell it there. And they also, they sold grain out of there too, because I can remember going there and buying feed for our chickens there at Bleach Mill. They had a,
Were there other grain elevators for the trains to come up and get filled up, or was it just the ones that sit out there and tipped them down?
that's the only one I ever knew of. And so, you know, a lot of the farmers used that. And it was a very popular place, and they're the ones that built the building downtown where the Chamber of Commerce is, which they called the Farmers Club, for them to go and socialize.
And then they had the first electricity there
Yeah.
from Bushman.
And there were a lot of things going on, a lot of lumber mills, you know. Of course, there was a huge carriage factory. The All-Brand Carriage Factory was here in town. And then once the automobiles started making their appearance, the carriage factory shut down.
What years were the Renos?
The Renos were the 1880s.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So the vigilantes had already had their say. At one time in the 1800s, Seymour was known as one of the worst criminal areas, cities in the Midwest.
Yes, yeah.
And it was primarily because of the Reno brothers and so much that was going on during that period of time. The Renos were some brothers that lived north of town, and they decided to take up a life of crime. They committed what is considered the first train robbery. Everybody always said it was the first train robbery in the world. I think it was the first train, I know it was the first train robbery in the United States. And they would rob and steal from people. And at that time, the way the town was laid out, you know, you had your two trains crossing, east, west, and north, south. So if you were coming from Louisville and you wanted to go to St. Louis, then you would have to change trains in Seymour. And so they knew this, so they would have a wagon there, and when the passengers got off the train, they would say, well, you know, we'll be happy to take you to a hotel. And so they would take them over. There were 2 or 3 hotels in downtown Seymour, and unload them and figure out who they were. And then the next morning, it was very possible that passenger would never be seen again. It was a pretty good racket. And, you know, we had a very bad reputation. They left town for a while and went down to Missouri and the area down there and robbed a bunch of county courthouses. They would break in, and one of them, in fact, was arrested down there and stayed down there for the rest of his life because he was in jail. But anyway, the Renos were finally arrested, and they were taken. Some of them were hung right west of town here. There's a little area called Hangman's Crossing. It's where 2nd Street runs into Tipton Street at the end of 2nd Street, and there was a big tree there. And the vigilantes hung several of the gang members there, and then 2 of the Renos were taken to New Albany along with another gang member, and the vigilantes actually went to New Albany, broke them out of jail, and hung them there. And they put up signs all over Seymour naming names of gangsters and robbers. And they, you know, the vigilantes put up these signs, and they said, either you leave town or you'll be next. And they managed to clean up the town. because the sheriff was afraid of them and was not doing anything to protect the people. And so, you know, vigilantism is not something that we're proud of, but it's something that cleaned up the town.
And they're buried here, in
Yeah.
the old cemetery, some of the
They are
Rhinos
buried at the Seymour Cemetery, which is on 9th Street. You can see their graves there. Another kind of an odd little fact that I've been told, and I haven't actually found this in print, but I was told, and I found a little article about it in one of the newspapers, that 230 people were dug up after
Yes.
they buried the Rhinos in the city cemetery. Their relatives had them dug up and buried at Riverview because they did not want their relatives buried in the same cemetery as the Reno were. So the Renos are kind of there by themselves off on the side, and quite a colorful history. If you haven't been over to the railroad depot on Broadway, the Visitor Center, have you been there yet? And it tells you a little bit about the Reno brothers in the history of Seymour, and that's laid out there in the Visitor Center. And if you haven't been there, I would urge that you go. I think you would enjoy going to it and finding the information they have there at the Visitor Center. It's laid out very nicely. If you haven't seen it, you need to go see it. The depot, that was the last remaining depot in Seymour. It was a freight depot. We had a couple of really elaborate passenger depots, and they were torn down through the years. They weren't preserved. And that's a couple of the buildings, like the Majestic Theater. It would have been wonderful if that building had been saved, but it was raised in order to build a business there. So, but there were some really fantastic buildings here in Seymour, but unfortunately they weren't kept.
Well, isn't the Party Law Office building, didn't that used to be the Pony Express building? Because if you look way up on
Yes.
on the roof area, there is this round medallion type thing with a running horse on it.
Yeah, the Party Law Office at
Yes.
the corner of
Well, it's
St. Louis
Chestnut.
Avenue and Chestnut
Yeah.
is the former Pony Express building.
But I can remember when I was a youngster, I would walk down the streets of Seymour and stare at the top of the buildings before people would remodel them and knock them down, and they all were unique. The architecture was fantastic, and of course, I mean, they were proud of their building. They put their name on it.
Yeah. And back then, it was different because someone would build a tall building and they'd have like a grocery store underneath, and then upstairs they would have insurance offices or all kinds of different offices.
Yeah.
A lot of the business people would have offices in the downtown area, so it was a very busy place.
I just feel so bad that our post office is going to rack and ruin because the architecture in that, and the telephone company is unique.
It's
And-
very unique.
And I mean, they're
It's
just.
going to take an effort on somebody's part to get that restored. It would make a good museum,
Yes,
but it's,
but I mean, you know what? If a building is not occupied and not taken care of, it deteriorates pretty
yeah,
fast.
that's true.
But that architecture down there is I love it, and I just don't understand. And it's like our covered bridges. We have a few left. And
It's like anything else.
it's expensive to restore and keep old from deteriorating.